Well, since my heart belongs to you, I can't help but be a fool in love.
A faint sound at the back of the hall, one pair of hands clapping. Then another. And another. The applause grew slowly, rising like a wave gathering strength, until it crashed into a full standing ovation. People stood up row by row, compelled not by excitement, but by emotion. Tears fell freely. Smiles spread without effort. Hearts felt lighter, fuller, awake. Alejandro stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed, realizing that in a single performance he had done something no one expected from a quiet Filipino singer with a borrowed guitar and a dream larger than life. He hadn't just sung a song. He had changed AGT forever. As Alejandro moved into the final lines of the song, an extraordinary quietness settled over the hall. It wasn't the ordinary pause that followed a good performance. It was something deeper, a silence that felt heavy, fragile, almost sacred. Even the air seemed to hesitate, unsure whether exhaling might break the moment. The last note rose gently from his voice, floating upward as if it could reach beyond the roof of the theater and into the night sky. It was soft, warm, and trembling with everything he had carried inside him for years. And then, like the closing of a chapter, the note faded into silence. Alejandro kept his eyes closed for a breath longer. Not out of fear, but out of gratitude. For his father. For the journey. For the courage it took to stand on that stage. He felt the quiet around him, not empty, but full of something he had never felt before, acceptance. When he finally opened his eyes, the world stood still. Simon Cowell had not moved. His hands were clasped. His expression was unreadable, frozen somewhere between shock and awe. A man known for quick judgments was suddenly speechless. It wasn't the silence of doubt, it was the silence that only comes when someone has witnessed something unforgettable. The other judges sat perfectly still, their faces softened, their eyes shining. No one dared speak first. No one wanted to be the one to break what Alejandro had created. And then it happened. The judges, usually composed and controlled, exchanged quiet glances. How could one man, standing so still, create so much emotion? How could a voice be so strong and so fragile at the same time? Every note that Alejandro released carried a story of years spent unseen, a story of love that never left, a story of a dream that refused to die even when everything else did. People weren't just listening. They were remembering. Remembering their parents. Their sacrifices. Their dreams. Their heartbreaks. Their hopes. Alejandro's voice had become a mirror, reflecting pieces of everyone who heard him. By the time he reached the middle of the song, the entire audience was wrapped in a silence so emotional, so raw, that it felt sacred. It was the kind of silence that could only come from hearts being touched all at once. And although Alejandro couldn't see their faces clearly from the stage, he could feel it. He could feel that, for the first time in his life, the world was truly listening. As Alejandro's voice moved through the hall, it carried something deeper than melody. It carried life. It carried truth. It carried a kind of emotion that didn't need language to be understood. The sound wrapped around the crowd like a quiet embrace, reaching people who didn't know him, didn't know his struggles, yet somehow felt everything he was singing. The camera swept across the audience. On one side, a mother clutched her chest, feeling memories rise, memories of people she had lost, dreams she once chased, moments she tried to bury. A single tear rolled down her cheek before she could stop it. A young boy sat beside his father, staring at the stage with wide eyes. He didn't know who Elvis was. He didn't know the history behind the music. But he knew this voice made him feel something warm, something gentle, something he had never heard before. Even the toughest faces in the crowd began to soften. Men who rarely showed emotion found themselves blinking faster, pretending the lights were too bright. Couples reached for one another's hands without speaking. Strangers leaned forward in unison, drawn by an invisible pull they didn't understand. His father had passed away years ago, leaving behind an empty chair and a silence that echoed too loud. But tonight, on this stage thousands of miles from home, that silence felt full again. It felt warm. It felt like presence. As the music wrapped around him, Alejandro felt a hand on his shoulder, not real, but real enough. A comfort only memory could give. A strength only love could leave behind. He sang not to win. Not to impress. Not to be famous. He sang because his father once believed he could. He sang because, in moments like this, he felt his father standing with him, sharing the stage, guiding the notes, lifting the weight of fear from his chest. And the audience, without knowing any of this, felt the truth inside every word. As Alejandro's voice flowed through the hall, something inside him began to shift. Beneath the bright stage lights and the silent expectations of the judges, a softer light appeared in his memory, a memory he carried everywhere, even when he tried not to. It was the memory of his father, Mario Cruz, the man who first placed a small, old radio in front of him when he was only a child. Mario didn't have much, but he had music. And through that music, he taught young Alejandro how to feel life, not just live it. He taught him that songs were not meant to impress people, but to heal them. As Alejandro continued singing, the present moment blended with pieces of his past. He could almost see his father sitting on their worn-out wooden chair back home, tapping his foot, swaying his head lightly to the rhythm. The same gentle smile. The same hopeful eyes. The same quiet encouragement that had carried him through every difficult day. There were nights when Alejandro felt like giving up, nights when dreams felt too heavy for a man with so little. And on those nights, it was always his father's voice he remembered. A reminder that talent meant nothing without heart, and heart meant everything when life got hard. The hall was alive with scattered murmurs, soft laughter, and restless movements as people settled into their seats. AGT was always loud before a performance, a mix of excitement, curiosity, and impatience. But all of that changed the moment Alejandro walked onto the stage. His quiet presence created a strange calm, as if the room sensed something different about him even before he sang a single note. The judges glanced up, expecting another regular audition. Simon Cowell, known for his sharp eyes and even sharper expectations, leaned back in his chair with a familiar look of skepticism. He had seen thousands of performers, hopeful, nervous, confident, broken, and very few ever made him pause. But the moment Alejandro lifted his head and placed his hand over the microphone, something subtle shifted in the air. The band was silent. The crowd was still finding their breath. And Alejandro, with all the softness of a man who had lived more life than he spoke about, closed his eyes and began. His first note was gentle, almost fragile, as though he was offering the world a small piece of his soul to see if they would hold it carefully. And then, slowly, the voice grew. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just honest. Deeply, painfully honest. The sound rolled across the hall like a warm wave, touching the quiet corners where people stored their forgotten dreams. Every word came from a place of truth, carrying stories of months he struggled, years he waited, and moments he almost gave up but didn't. And that was when it happened. Simon Cowell stopped moving. The stage lights glowed like distant stars, their brilliance almost blinding as Miguel Santos stood behind the heavy velvet curtain. His hands trembled slightly, clutching the microphone, as if it were a lifeline rather than a simple tool. The roar of the crowd beyond was deafening, yet inside him, a small voice whispered doubt. Could one voice truly change the hearts of strangers? Miguel's mind drifted back to his childhood in a quiet Filipino village. The sun would rise over rust-colored rooftops, spilling golden light over narrow streets where children played barefoot. And in a tiny, worn-down house, his grandmother, Lola Rosa, sat him on her lap, gently guiding his fingers across a battered old keyboard. She never spoke of fame or fortune. Instead, she told him, "Sing, Miguel. Let your music heal, even if it heals just one heart." He remembered the nights he would sing alone, the faint sound of his voice blending with the whispering wind. The neighbors often laughed or shook their heads, but Miguel's determination only grew. Music was more than sound, it was emotion, memory, love. It was the way he felt connected to his grandmother after his parents had passed. She was his anchor, his guide, and the reason he dared to dream of a stage like this. Now, standing behind the curtain, the weight of that dream pressed on him. Simon Cowell, the judge notorious for stopping performances in seconds, was already scrutinizing the contestants with a sharp gaze. Miguel could feel the unspoken challenge in that glance. Could he impress the man who had seen it all, judged it all, and rarely been moved? A deep breath. A trembling step forward. The velvet curtain parted, revealing the bright, expectant eyes of the audience. The hush that fell over the theater felt almost sacred. In that moment, Miguel realized that this was more than a performance. It was a bridge between his past and his future, between fear and courage. And then the thought that had haunted him for years resurfaced: can a single voice really change everything? With his heart pounding and the spotlight settling on him like warm sunlight, Miguel opened his mouth, ready to find out. The theater was alive with murmurs. Whispers floated like restless shadows, carrying doubt and expectation. Some faces reflected curiosity, others skepticism. The audience had seen countless performers before, and most of them had failed to leave a mark. Miguel's heart thumped in rhythm with the murmurs, each beat echoing in his chest like a warning. Simon Cowell's gaze was sharp and critical, a blade of judgment that could cut confidence in an instant. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing, as if ready to interrupt the moment Miguel dared to begin. The young Filipino singer felt a shiver run down his spine. Every fiber of his being screamed, "Do not falter. You've come too far." Miguel closed his eyes for a brief instant, recalling the countless hours he had spent practicing in a tiny room back home. The walls had been thin, the ceiling low, but the music had filled every corner of his soul. Each note he had sung alone in the quiet night had been a rehearsal for this very moment. The memory of his grandmother, Lola Rosa, smiling proudly at his earliest attempts, gave him courage. Her belief in him had been unwavering, even when the world seemed to doubt. He opened his eyes and lifted the microphone. A fragile note slipped out first, hesitant, almost tentative. The audience stirred, unsure what to expect. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, sensing that something different was unfolding. Simon's frown deepened, his hand twitching as if he were about to stop the performance before it truly began. Miguel's chest rose and fell with each breath, and the initial note grew steadier. His voice, soft yet determined, began to carry emotion that could not be ignored. Every word was soaked in his journey, the struggles, the dreams, the quiet nights spent imagining this exact stage. The room, once filled with skepticism, started to quiet. Listeners felt something unfamiliar stir in their hearts, a gentle pull, a spark of curiosity that refused to be silenced. And even as Simon prepared to interrupt, Miguel continued, undeterred. With each note, he wove a fragile thread of courage, connecting himself to the audience, to the judges, and to the memory of his grandmother. Doubt lingered in the corners, but a quiet magic began to bloom, and the first stirrings of awe began to ripple through the theater. Miguel took a slow, steady breath. The first tentative notes had set the stage, but now, the music had to breathe, had to soar. His eyes closed, and for a moment, the theater vanished. There was only him, his voice, and the story he carried within. Every tremor of emotion, every ounce of hope and pain, flowed into each note. The melody rose gently, almost whispering at first, like a secret shared between friends. Then it grew bolder, filling every corner of the theater with a resonance that made hearts ache and swell simultaneously. Audience members leaned forward instinctively, drawn to the purity and depth of his sound. Children pressed their faces to the seats in front, captivated. Elderly patrons wiped quiet tears from their cheeks. Simon Cowell, the man who had interrupted countless acts before, shifted uneasily in his chair. His eyes, once sharp with skepticism, widened. He raised a hand, instinctively ready to halt the performance, but found it frozen in midair. Miguel's voice had slipped past doubt, past judgment, straight into something raw, unguarded, and undeniable. Miguel's hands gripped the microphone, knuckles white, yet his body was calm. The spotlight painted his face in soft golden hues, highlighting every flicker of emotion. Sweat glimmered on his forehead, yet his voice did not falter. Each note carried the echo. Miguel's hands gripped the microphone, knuckles white, yet his body was calm. The spotlight painted his face in soft golden hues, highlighting every flicker of emotion. Sweat glimmered on his forehead, yet his voice did not falter. Each note carried the echoes of the small village where he had grown up, of his grandmother's lullabies, of nights spent dreaming while the world slept. Every listener felt it, the authenticity, the vulnerability, the courage that shone brighter than any stage lights. The murmurs of doubt that had lingered at the beginning had disappeared. In their place was a quiet, collective awe. Some faces were frozen in disbelief, others glimmered with tears, and a few mouths hung open, unable to utter a sound. Simon's hand finally dropped, his eyes fixed on Miguel as though trying to decipher the impossible. He had interrupted many performances, but he had never felt a moment like this. As Miguel reached the high, emotional peaks of his song, it was as if the air itself had changed. The theater vibrated with a gentle, invisible energy. Miguel was no longer just performing, he was telling a story, sharing a soul. And in that story, every listener found something familiar, the longing for hope, the courage to dream, the beauty of pure, unfiltered passion. Miguel's voice soared, carrying not just melody but the weight of his journey. Each note seemed to stretch beyond the theater walls, reaching into hearts and stirring emotions that words could never touch. The audience sat in stunned silence at first, and then, one by one, they began to rise, caught in a tide of admiration and awe. Tears streamed down faces, and hands trembled as they clutched at chest and seat alike, unable to contain the rush of emotion. Simon Cowell, usually unshakable, leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. The sharp edges of his criticism had dulled into something unfamiliar, wonder. He had witnessed talent before, certainly, but never raw emotion so untainted, so pure, that it commanded attention without a single word of argument. His hand hovered over the buzzer once, twice, and then remained still, frozen. He could not stop this performance, it had surpassed judgment, expectation, even disbelief. The spotlight illuminated Miguel's face, sweat glistening like morning dew, eyes closed, lost in the music. The theater's air seemed to vibrate, every note a pulse, every pause a heartbeat shared between performer and audience. In that moment, Miguel was not merely singing, he was telling a story of resilience, of hope, of unwavering belief in one's dreams. Each crescendo carried the essence of his grandmother's love, of her whispered encouragements through years of practice and quiet determination. As the final notes lingered, the room erupted into a standing ovation. Some clutched their hands to their hearts, others wiped away tears, and a few whispered, unable to articulate the depth of what they had felt. Simon, for the first time that evening, allowed himself a small, genuine smile, nodding slowly as though acknowledging the undeniable truth, this young man's gift could not be stopped, could not be ignored. Miguel opened his eyes, scanning the crowd, and his gaze found Lola Rosa in the front row. Her face shone with pride, her hands trembling with emotion. In that shared glance, generations of dreams and sacrifices intertwined. The performance had transformed more than the room, it had transformed hearts, softened even the hardest judgment, and reminded everyone present of the power of courage, humility, and authenticity. In that moment it was clear, Miguel was not just a singer on a stage. He was a force, a reminder that true passion could ignite inspiration in the most unexpected places. The final note hung in the air, trembling like a fragile promise. For a heartbeat, the theater held its breath, suspended between the echo of Miguel's voice and the awe it had left behind. And then, as if an invisible dam had broken, the audience erupted. Applause thundered, spilling over rows of seats, spilling into hearts, spilling into every corner of the room. Standing ovations rose like waves, some faces streaked with tears, some smiles so wide they seemed to light the entire theater. Miguel's chest heaved as he lowered the microphone. Every nerve in his body buzzed with the aftershocks of what had just unfolded. The applause was not merely for his skill, it was for his courage, his vulnerability, the authenticity that had poured from him with every note. He had shared more than a song, he had shared a part of his soul. Simon Cowell finally stood, slowly, deliberately. His usual sharp demeanor softened into something rare, a genuine expression of respect and admiration. He extended a hand, not in judgment, but in acknowledgement. He had tried to interrupt, tried to doubt, but in the end, there was no stopping what was meant to be. The Filipino star had won not only the stage but the hearts of everyone who had witnessed him. Miguel's gaze swept the theater, landing on the familiar, warm face of Lola Rosa. Her eyes glimmered with tears, and her proud smile radiated a lifetime of sacrifice, love, and belief. In that single glance, Miguel felt the weight of every struggle, every quiet night spent dreaming, every note sung in solitude. All of it had led to this moment, a moment of recognition, of connection, pure, unfiltered human emotion. The applause continued, louder now, echoing like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Miguel took a small bow, feeling the invisible threads that connected him to the audience, to Simon, to his grandmother, and to every dreamer who had ever doubted themselves. He realized that talent alone could not move people, it was courage, humility, and the willingness to share one's truth that truly inspired. And in that quiet, golden aftermath, one thought lingered in the air, one voice, one heart, one moment, could be enough to change the world. Miguel had discovered it. The audience had felt it. And for everyone present, the world had grown a little brighter, a little kinder, and a little more full of hope.